Welcome to the WP Builds podcast, bringing you the latest news from the WordPress community. Now, welcome your hosts, David Wormsley and Nathan Wrigley.
Hello there, and welcome once again to the WP Builds podcast. You've reached episode number 312, entitled Zach Swinehart on How to Get More Done, aka Being More Productive, Part 2. It was published on Thursday, the 26th of January, 2023. My name's Nathan Wrigley, and just before we begin, a few bits of housekeeping. The first thing to mention is that the Page Builder Summit is just around the corner. It's happening between the 20th and 24th of February, and we're still looking for some sponsors. If your company is in the WordPress space, this is an excellent way to get your messaging out in front of a very WordPress-specific audience who are very much into the future of WordPress. You can find out more by going to pagebuildersummit.com/sponsors. One more time, pagebuildersummit.com/sponsors, and have a browse, see what you think, and you can always contact me on the WP Builds contact page if you've got any curiosity about filling up some of those spots. So one last time, pagebuildersummit.com/sponsors. And if you want to subscribe to what we do over here, head over to our subscribe page, wpbuilds.com/subscribe. The WP Builds podcast is brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with The Hub by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place, invoice clients, and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by heading to go.me/WP Builds. Once more, go.me/WP Builds. And we really thank GoDaddy Pro for their ongoing, continuing support of the WP Builds podcast. Okay, like I said at the top, this is episode 312. It's Zach Swinehart on part 2. It's a podcast in which he really goes to town on how to get deep work done, how to concentrate, how to be less distracted. There is a first part to this, and really, in all honesty, if you haven't listened to the first part, it's probably apropos that you do. I'd go and search for episode number 310 on the wpbuilds.com website and search for that and give that a play, because it kind of lays the foundation for this episode. We start off by going through whether or not I have kicked my email habit, whether I'm habitually checking. That was something that we set up at the end of the last episode. And then we really get into all of the bits and pieces that make up Jack's tooling, the way that he manages to get himself into being productive. And he calls this deep work. And he talks about all of the different tools and methods that he's got for doing this. I list out a bunch of tools that I found useful over time. And really, it's just a guideline for some of the ways that you might be able to grab your own attention back and be more in control of your own focus. It's a really interesting episode, and I hope that you enjoy it. I am joined on the podcast today, again, by Zach Swinehart. How are you doing, Zach?
Oh, I'm just great. How are you?
Yeah, good. Zach, if you weren't listening I was going to say last week, but it was a fortnight ago, 2 weeks ago, because that's the way we roll on this podcast. We intersperse them with interviews, and then I have a chat with David Wormsley. So 2 weeks ago, the first episode with Zach dealt with quite a lot of bits and pieces, and I'm going to say this podcast is a follow-up to that one. There may be some value in listening to this one in isolation, but I would imagine at the start of this conversation, I'm going to recommend go back, listen to the episode from a couple of weeks ago, because you're going to then get some context about what it is that we're going to talk about today. The reason that Zach's back is essentially we had too much to say, and about 50 minutes in, I called a halt and said, whoa, let's break this up into 2 episodes, and you left me with a bit of a challenge in the previous episode, didn't you?
I sure did. So we ended the last one with you committing to doing deep work until what time was it that you were going to not check your inbox?
Essentially midday.
All right.
Yeah.
So how's that been going?
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Wrigley.
Yes, that's right. Lie down on the sofa and tell me about your father. I have been very good. I disciplined myself because I kind of felt at the end of the last episode we were analysing where time may get wasted, and I felt that, for me at least anyway, email was a great time suck. I could really get lost in email for ages and kind of I had it up on a pedestal. I'd open it in the morning when there were probably better things to be done. So open it would be first thing that happened on the morning would be to go through the email, and I've no idea what's coming in there. I can't filter what's in my inbox. It's just in my inbox. But because it's in my inbox, I would deal with it. So yes, I've been very good. I didn't check it until midday each day. So in that sense, I was very good. But here comes the killer. Do you want to know what I did instead?
Uh-oh.
Yeah, I read a book.
Okay, well, it could be worse. You could have doom scrolled Twitter or something.
Yes, I spent... So I didn't read until midday, but I definitely did. I kind of thought to myself, okay, I'm saving a bit of time here, so I gave myself a bit of leisure time. I typically spent about 20 minutes not starting. So I'd normally sit at my desk at about 8:30, something like that, and begin the day. And I found myself kind of lurking in the kitchen with my Kindle, reading my book and forgiving myself for that, and then beginning at 9 o'clock. So in some sense, it was a bit of a swing and a roundabout. In some sense, I lost a bit of time, but definitely gained a bit of time. But I did, I did notice though that I had no. There was literally no impediment for me doing it. There was no pull. There was no tug. There was no mental sort of beckoning towards the email. I didn't feel I needed to open it up. And when
Really? Wow.
Yeah, and when I had that kind of instinct to go and check the tab where it normally is, because on my browser it's always the far left tab. I've got a whole bunch of tabs open, as I'm sure everybody has. It's the furthest left one. I found myself kind of automatically, there was a bit of muscle memory, going over there with the mouse and then seeing that it wasn't there to be opened, and I just didn't open it, and so there was no problem. So in terms of productivity, I definitely got some time back. I don't know that it was a direct correlation to, okay, you saved yourself half an hour a day or 40 minutes a day or whatever, but it was interesting to me that and I'm going to say in inverted commas, the addiction that I had to that didn't present itself as a problem. I didn't feel like I was withdrawn from it. So I'll chalk that up as a success. Let's hope I can continue.
So the question I'd have on that last bit about if it was a net gain, do you feel that because you essentially, if you didn't check the inbox and you read the book, when you did check the inbox, did you process it in the same amount of time or less, or did you essentially just defer inbox time from the morning to later in the day and it took just as much?
Yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that, but now that you mention it, yes, I definitely had a different relationship with it because of the time of day that it was at, and my day was already busy. And let's say, for example, so midday, typically I would go and grab a bite to eat. So it's lunch and I'm already halfway through things. I set the alarm or whatever it may be. Midday comes along, stop, pause a task halfway through. And then when I came back, I was already halfway through something. So I was eager to finish that off, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So there was definitely a change in the way that I dealt with email. That's true. I was far more efficient, shall we say, and less dawdling. Yeah.
And then when you did process your inbox, so let's say your normal vibe would be to check your inbox for, I don't know what it would look like, but say 15 minutes every hour.
Yeah, maybe less. Maybe if you aggregated it, it would end up being sort of like 5 minutes every hour. But in the morning, It could be anything up to like 30, 40 minutes easily, yeah.
Okay, so suppose old Nathan style, we added up all those separate blocks, counting the context switching and stuff. Do you think that if you add up those blocks, let's say it comes out to an hour, did you still spend this same hour even though you did it in a condensed time, or did it come out to less, do you reckon?
You're going to have to rephrase that because I didn't quite understand where was the target of that question. I wasn't quite sure where you were aiming it.
What I'm driving at here is you got to read a book that you enjoyed in the morning. And if you did that and the consequence of that was that you just created more work for yourself later because your inbox took just as much time as it would have before the experiment, then you didn't really get like a quote free book reading. You instead just got a book reading that caused your work to take
Right,
longer.
I deferred the problem till later.
Yeah.
Yes, no, that's not my experience. I felt that I got through the exact same amount of time with an extra bit of time in the day to read a book.
Oh, so that's a huge win.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, I would say so. That's definitely true. The efficiency that I had, the sort of drive to get it done because I knew I had other things. And in my case, my time is very much constrained by the family. So at a certain hour of the day, the children who've been at school, And so the children depart the house, and by 8:30, essentially the house is quiet. So that's when I can begin. So that's when things begin. But in the afternoon, there's a certain time on a particular day. It's different because the kids do different things and clubs and all of that kind of stuff. I have this moment where I know that I'm going to be possibly derailed for the rest of the day until maybe they've even gone to bed.
Right.
And so given that I hadn't looked at the email until midday, the amount of time I had left in the day was typically much, much shorter. So yes, I think it did have an impact. Yeah. Well, put it this way, I'm going to keep doing it.
Okay, well that was going to be my question. That's
Yeah.
the true demonstration of value.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because I removed it from my phone a long time ago. I can't remember if we went into this, but essentially my phone is now derelict of anything that can reach out to me. There's no notifications. There's no Facebook. I've disabled email. I've got rid of absolutely everything which has a social component or a notification component, except text messages, because I want to be in touch with my kids and my wife and so on and so forth. And I was able to do that years ago, and it had no impact on me whatsoever. But it's interesting that on the desktop, I kind of make excuses to keep that stuff going. And I think maybe you've shoved me in the right direction to also make the endeavor there. Just block it into time, chunk it into, I don't know, in my case, it'll probably be after lunch now, check them, and then maybe just before I knock off in the evening, have a quick check, see if anything catastrophically urgent has emerged. But typically it won't. So yeah, bit of a win.
Nice. Well, yeah, I'm going to count that as a win.
Yeah. Okay, where we ended off last episode, Zach went through his sort of bullet-pointed list. I think it may be 6, possibly 7, I can't exactly remember. And you were finishing that episode describing your little 6 or 7-point plan as to how you go about achieving things. So do you want to just begin this episode reiterating what it was that you said toward the end of the last episode?
Yes, defo. So the first step, very forest through the trees, is to just determine what your big goals are. And I think that Nathan's example of having some time with his Kindle is a great illustration that your big goals don't necessarily have to be business goals. It might be that you want to free up more time to spend with your family, or free up some time to read a book, or just enjoy your life. These efficiency gains don't necessarily need to be harnessed to just, become some task executing robot. So if we start with the big goals, and it's helpful in the context of business goals because we're going to reverse engineer them. But if you start with your goals and then you look at what needs to happen to get there, the next step is to do the work that moves you forward towards that daily. And actually, Nathan, I'm sorry, let's cut this because I think the bit about the personal life doesn't make sense here because the point is that we're reverse engineering them. Sorry.
So when you say let's cut this a little bit, what do you mean?
I'll just restart the framework.
Okay.
I'm just, for number 1, I'm not going to say any of that stuff about your family. I think that'll come later.
Okay. So my little bit that I just had,
you can keep it.
I can keep
and I'll just
it.
start
Okay,
again.
That's fine. Go for it.
Totally. So the first step, very high level, forest through the trees, is to determine what your big goals are. So for you, if you're trying to scale your agency or something, you might have the goal of scaling the agency. And the second step is to determine what needs to happen next to get there. And if you don't know, that's where you might be able to, say, work with a mentor or take a course, and maybe working with a mentor, taking a course is what needs to happen next to get there so that you can determine the next steps. From there, I like to make a point to do the work that moves me forward towards that goal daily. So those things that we determined in step 2 that we need to do, work on those daily when I have my best energy. For me, that means working on it before I do anything else. Very first thing in the morning, no notifications, no nothing, just wake up, drink coffee, start writing or start coding or start building processes. And then step 4 is only after you've spent this important time on what's going to move your business forward, should you spend time working, quote, in your business. So if you're trying to grow your agency, for example, but you're still doing all the fulfillment yourself, that work in the business is the fulfillment, whereas the work on the business would be processes or whatever you need to prioritize. Step 5 is just kind of a little, it's almost like a friendly version of a knife twist, I guess, if there is a friendly knife twist, which is just that being mindful of the idea that if you do want to grow your business, which I don't think it necessarily is a good fit for every freelancer to want to scale an agency. Certainly not for me. But if you do, each week that you spend kind of stuck in fulfillment is essentially just treading water. And you might look back after a year or 2 or 5 or whatever and see that you're kind of in the same place you've been for a while. And that's why it's so important to prioritize that time on the business. And from there, last step is to optimize your time and support yourself with tools and systems to help pick up slack where you naturally are a little bit weak, instead of shaming yourself and feeling like you should have a lot of willpower or a lot of self-control or just be able to handle it all on your own. And we'll talk today about tools and strategies as well. So
Okay.
that's the high level overview.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I'm just going to quickly go on to step 6. I know that's kind of about face, but I just want to dwell on it because it's kind of interesting to me. Because the optimizing of the time kind of implies that you've been through all the other 5 points first, and then you've decided to, okay, there's things broken in here. I haven't been working on the business so much as in the business. I need to juggle this and figure out how much time I want to do this. Do you revisit this on a sort of daily basis? Are you trying to optimize the time on a daily basis, or do you try to do this over a week or a month? In other words, have you got things like working on your business, not in your business? Do you dedicate a whole day to that or a whole week to that, or how do you sort of divide all of this up?
So for revisiting, I revisit both daily and weekly.
Okay.
I think last episode I might have linked to my daily journal template, but if I didn't, I can link to it today.
Yep,
and I'll link to it today anyway.
Yep.
So one of the things I have in my daily journal template is like what went well, what needs work, what could be tweaked moving forward. And when I notice myself getting knocked off, like for example, something I've been currently struggling with my no notifications thing is that whenever I turn my phone on to do my evening routine, which I have to do on my phone with data so that I can like connect to my my symptoms and nutrition tracking app, sometimes I'll get notifications when I don't want to be getting notifications. And so I have to like debug this. And so I kind of log this as a weakness. Or if I got distracted by something when I was meaning to do deep work, I can kind of make a note of that and then think about how I might tweak that moving forward. So I think it's one of those just ongoing evolving processes of honing a framework. Obviously, you can't spend 30 minutes or an hour or whatever researching tools and journaling every single day. But I think it's one of those things where if you notice you keep having the same problem, like a good example is you and I both use different tools for hiding the inbox feed when you go to Gmail. So
Right.
it kind of adds an extra step. So that's a great example of one where it's like, if someone notices that just out of habit, they keep clicking the little Gmail icon on their phone, the little optimization to theirs is just remove the Gmail icon from your home screen. Or if they keep clicking to the Gmail tab on their computer, install one of these little plugins. So little optimizations like that I do very often. Broad ones I like to revisit on like weekly or monthly journal.
I guess it's true to say that everybody's going to be different in this, in that, you'll have different constraints in time. You'll have a different relationship to your work in the evening. It may be that you're quite happy to work throughout every evening, and you're a bit of a workaholic in inverted commas, but you might not want to do that. You might want to switch everything off and demarcate tons of time to the family or whatever it might be. Maybe it's 9 to 5, in which case you need to be constrained. Just another one quick thing before we go into the whole, dig deeper into each and every piece of that puzzle. Do you kind of include leisure time in this? Do you kind of block your leisure time in the same way that you do all of the other bits and pieces to do with work? In other words, do you allow yourself, say, 4 hours in the evening on a Monday, 2 hours in the evening on a Tuesday, or do you just say, no, time out, finish, start again in the morning?
Both. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I don't, and I regret it.
Yeah.
I like music production. It's kind of it's my designated hobby.
Yeah.
It's my chosen productive hobby. And when I do music production, which I usually do on Saturdays as my music production day, I won't do my work cycles. I won't be notification free, these sorts of things. And I don't think that's good. Because part of me is like, well, this isn't work. I shouldn't do all this crazy stuff. But at the same time, the quality of that experience is kind of diminished. I spend an hour and a half responding to things on Facebook or whatever, and it's not adding any value to my life and it's not helping me feel recharged. So the answer is sometimes I do. I try to block off time during the day for leisure, but it is something I'm currently still working on and having challenges with, because like one of the things I want to talk about today is that once you're really dialed into deep work, it can be easy if you have an ADHD hyper-focused personality like me, where you actually need to be really intentional about building in enough shallow work time. So what I'll keep doing is my deep work time will bleed over. I don't have enough time to do my shallow work, which means I have to do all this shallow work and it bleeds into the evening, which means that the thing that came last, aka my leisure, takes the hit and gets cut out. And so I think that's a big weakness in my system that I need to improve.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, for me, it's more of a simple switch off and then decide. The family kind of orientates my leisure time. You know, it's not just me deciding what I can do with things. There's often other things which I know I've got to do. And it's interesting because my calendar is full of events that I know I've got to be a part of, but they're not something that I am directly a part of. So it's taxiing children to various other places, and they can be at all sorts of curious times of day. So I've got to be a little bit flexible, and I guess that's the same for anybody who's a sort of freelance. Okay, all right. All of that being dealt with, let's just hand it over to you and see where this episode wants to go, because I know you've given it quite a bit of thought. Where do you want to begin with your sort of deep dive into the deep work?
Well, I think the sexiest thing here is probably tools.
Okay.
Even though it is last of the protocol, I think most people listening will be quite keen to learn about tools and strategies.
Okay.
I think that the one kind of concept that I'd really love to impart before we dive into tools is with the idea of those little daily tweaks and honing and stuff. I think that the biggest mindset shift here that's made a huge, huge difference on my life is this idea of building a personal protocol. I actually in Notion have a handbook for like habits and things to do to live a good life. And the idea of building a protocol is really valuable because it's like a system that you can tweak over time, that if you just follow the system, you don't have to think about it. You can just reference your system and things just kind of work. So when we're talking about these different strategies and you're thinking about where you have your strengths and where you have your challenges, I think if you'd always be oriented towards building a protocol, that will probably be really helpful depending on your personality.
All right. So Notion, you mentioned. I confess I've not used Notion. What
really?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. Everybody's raving about it. But I had the merest look at it one time. And I figured, actually, I've got things which do basically everything that I want. And I have that. Actually, I am a kind of reformed and recovering AppSumo addict. Years and years ago. Honestly, it's not been for a while, to be honest, but I kind of bought all the tools and tried everything, and I've ended up settling on some probably less than optimal, but optimal for me set of tools. So I know that Notion does a whole load of whiz-bang interesting things, but I'm not entirely sure that they're things that I'm all that interested in, given what I've got to achieve each day. But just outline, maybe if that's what you want to do, outline what Notion brings to you.
Sure. So Notion, I'm not sure is necessarily critical for my deep work specifically, which is the idea behind this episode. But I will say I love Notion for just organizing everything. I use it for organizing personal projects like music production. I use it as project management for all my client projects. I use it for like a content calendar for blogging. I have the notes about this podcast episode in there. I have my daily journal in there. Just everything you ever need to keep track. It's a second brain for me. It's not built like that as much as, what's that one? It starts with an R. I don't know. There's one that's a software tool for like literally a second brain. But
okay, no, I'm not sure.
But yeah, maybe we use this to pivot into tools. So I think with tools, we can kind of break tools into a few different categories. Do you want me to recap the categories first?
Yeah, why not? That's a good idea, yeah.
So I, in thinking about it, as it pertains to getting good, deep work done, I feel like the categories are accountability, deep work guidance, which I'll explain in a minute, routine management, task management, impulse control, connection with most important work, and deep focus encouragement.
Okay.
And so for accountability, I think that this is more useful for some people than others. I think most people know whether or not they benefit from accountability. And when you and I were talking last time, I remember you said something to me like, if I tell somebody I'm going to do something, I will definitely do it because I just always do.
Yeah.
Something like that, right?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. If I've promised something to somebody, I feel awful if I don't deliver it. So for me, it's a very effective way of keeping myself in check. Promise something to somebody is going to work for me every time. Yeah.
Nice. And I think there are probably some people who the accountability thing works really well. Others, they might shy away from it a little bit because they'll feel shame if they don't do what they said or something, which I guess can pull you into a kind of a bad cycle.
Yeah, I think you have to be mindful of that, in that, if for example it's bound by a deadline, missing the deadline has the same impact for me as not completing it at all. Yeah. I feel like I've totally failed. So I have to be a bit mindful of that and kind of have workarounds. If I realize a long time in advance it's going to fail, then I'll get on the email or the phone or whatever it might be and make sure that the person on the other end of that promise knows that I'm likely not to fulfill it. And then I feel fine again.
Okay, good. So you have good coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
You don't just fall into a shame spiral.
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a few tools within the accountability department that I've found quite helpful. So if you're listening and accountability is helpful for you, there's a tool called FocusMate, which basically pairs you with somebody over video. And at the beginning of this work session, you say what you're going to work on, and they say what they're going to work on, and then you're screen sharing. And then you check in at the end. So if at the end you're like, oh, actually, I didn't work on that blog post, I just watched Rick and Morty, they'll hold you
or read a
accountable
book.
Yeah. So that's a cool one. Another one that I've been really loving lately that's going to come up in a bunch of contexts is a bunch of these categories rather is Habitica, which Nathan, I think I was telling you about that last time.
Yeah,
right?
you were. You definitely mentioned that last time. Yeah, interesting.
It has a nice accountability component that I kind of want to disable actually, because I think accountability for me doesn't work that well. I think I find it very triggering sometimes if I'm like holding a group back. But
okay, yeah.
But with Habitica, if you don't do your daily routines, you actually damage your other party members. It's like a gamified RPG kind of habit thing. So it's a nice little accountability stick.
Nice.
And then a couple others in the accountability category that might give you ideas is an accountability buddy. I had somebody back in the day who I would check in with like every day on Skype, back when people used Skype. That was pretty cool. Goal setting buddy. And I feel like the ultimate accountability, if you want to know where your time goes, is something to track time like Toggle. I've been lately playing with not just tracking time I spend on client projects, but tracking time I spend on breaks, eating food, things like that, to see where it is that my time is actually going versus just where my client work time is actually going. It's been very illuminating.
Yeah. So interestingly, with that one, do you switch the timer on when you begin your work and then switch it off, and then do you begin another timer when your, let's say, lunch break or whatever it might be begins? Yeah. And then you end that and then start the work again, or do you just keep a track of the bits between when you were working? So knocked off at 12, started at 1:10. I've had an hour and 10 for lunch, that kind of thing.
The former.
Okay.
So the way I'll do it is if I have, and I guess I feel like I'll have a good guide for tracking this, so I can link to that in the show notes too. But the way I like to do it is I'll create in Toggle a client for myself. So it's like a Zach Swinehart client, and then projects within that client for work on the business. So for example, marketing, outreach, content creation, things like that.
Yeah.
And so then if I'm writing a blog post, I'll track it to the Zach Swinehart content writing one. And then if I have work in the business, so like work for a client site, I'll switch the timer, and that's attached to the client as the client and project in Toggle. And then I have a set of projects for my personal life, and that's the one I need to develop a bit more as of today, where I'll switch to this like Zach Swinehart personal life versus Zach Swinehart on the business.
Right.
And that'll have projects.
And presumably if you're working with an hourly rate, your personal one is just clocking time and nothing more. It's just giving you a oversight of all of that. Whereas the client ones are also presumably leading into some sort of billing system, which calculates how much time you've spent and how much you need to bill and those kind of things. That's interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot. So I've experimented over the years with charging hourly, and I'm now going more towards per project on a more value-based pricing kind of thing. And the thing is, calculating effective hourly rate, obviously in both instances, is really important to know which one is having better results for you.
Yeah.
And so, so having that kind of Zach Swinehart business one for tracking stuff that, let's say I was doing an hourly client project, and there was some work that I didn't want to charge them for, but that I did on the project. So maybe I made a bad estimate. Something took way longer, but it was my fault, not their fault. Maybe I wouldn't want to charge them for that, but I still want to keep track of how that affected my total time on the project. I might switch to a Zach Swinehart project that's like, labeled as something like excess time or something. I don't have one set up for that currently, but yeah. So yeah, ideal day would be toggle running all gosh darn day.
Yeah, just flicking between one and the other. Yeah.
And I mentioned that Habitica will come up a bunch of times. So I've been using Habitica to help incentivize myself to do things that I want to do but don't ever seem to actually do. And so I created a little habit thingy in Habitica for track time on a non-work project. So every time I track time on a non-work project, I get to go in there, click the little plus, and I get a little happy celebratory sound, and I get experience points, and I get gold. It's really cool.
all the important stuff. Yeah, that's great. But these little incentives, they can kind of work. I'm just going to circle back on the first one that you mentioned, which was I don't know if it was the first, but an accountability partner, a real world one on Skype. I did that for a while, and then the kind of projects moved, and the way that I was working moved, and all of a sudden it became obvious that real world interaction wasn't really working anymore. For me, it's more... or at least it was, I would make promises to clients. And so the client was the person. So there was never that kind of, how to describe it? There was never that kind of particularly friendly approach towards accountability. It was just that I owed them something by then because I promised it. But I know that a lot of people do get a lot of success from having a friendly face on the end of Skype or whatever it is now, Zoom, and helping each other, giving each other a bit of support and camaraderie at the end of a long and busy day where you may feel that you failed. Just having that little pat on the back can be quite nice.
Yeah, and it can be so lonely being a freelancer working from home. So it's a nice it's nice to see a face consistently too.
Yeah. Okay, they're a fantastic set of tools. Do you want to carry on in that vein? Are there other tools in different spheres? Or
Yep. Unless you have anything you want to add for
No, I think that was good. Yeah.
So the next category I have up is deep work guidance. And what I mean by this is like a category of tool that's going to kind of help nudge you and remind you of what you're supposed to be doing right now. So one of those, which we already mentioned in the accountability section, is also FocusMate. So FocusMate is structured either on a 50-10 cycle or a 25-5 cycle. So like a 50-minute work cycle, 10-minute break.
Okay.
Or 25-5 would be 25 minutes work, 5-minute break. So that's kind of a way to manage your cadence. I notice, at least for myself, I don't know if you can relate to this or listeners can, and this actually happened to me just earlier today. If I start working and I hyper focus on something, like I'm coding or I'm writing or something, and I don't take breaks, I'll get into what I call code zombie mode, where my eyes just like kind of glaze over. I'm not making intelligent decisions and just bashing my head against the wall until I can get the code to compile. Do you ever have this? If you just sit down and crunch for like 3 hours, your brain just gets fried?
Yeah. 3 hours for me would be almost unachievable, I think. I'm definitely in smaller chunks than that. For me, the solution is get out the chair and, if possible, get outside.
That's a good one.
Being outside just fixes so much for me. I mean, obviously, if I'm going out into the pouring rain, that's really not. That's going to have the exact opposite effect. But if it's a nice day and I can go for a quick walk round the block a bit further, I forgive myself that many times a day. But typically it's not that long, 10 minutes, just something to clear the air. And I come back and I find that things that were annoying, 20 minutes ago have suddenly got less of an annoying complexion to them.
Yeah, I love that. And I've had success with that too. And, the good thing is that since you live in the UK, as I understand it, pretty much never rains there. So you
that's right. Yeah, it's very dry. I never have to carry an umbrella. No, it's a constant battle, that one. But even just so I'm pretty good at not kind of getting deflected by going down and watching telly or something like that. In other words, substituting entertainment for work. I'm very disciplined with that. I simply do not do it, apart from this book thing, which is like a new, slightly strange habit. But if it was raining and I didn't want to go outside, I would just find something else to do. You know, I might do some dishes or a bit of some of the household chores that need doing. Just something to get my head off things, really. Yeah.
Yeah. Something I've been experimenting with lately. I read somewhere, I don't even know where, that in your breaks as a computer worker, it's really helpful to look at something that's like at least 20 feet or meters, 20 some unit of measurement away.
Yep.
I've been playing with, sometimes like I'll go to the back porch and I'll work on like writing some lyrics where I'll look off into the distance for a bit, write the lyric down, you know, something like that to just, or exercising in the living room, looking far away.
Do you know, this is really interesting to me because more recently, and I do think it's a product of my age, but it's definitely something I need to deal with. If I've been in front of the screen all day and I haven't given myself those breaks because I haven't felt the need for them, I spend about 20 minutes having to readjust my sight. So I'll go down and I'll be, let's say, preparing some food or something like that, and I suddenly realize all of it's out of focus. And it genuinely takes about 15 to 20 minutes for that focus to change, and then I'm fine for the rest of the evening. But I do think that's a curious thing, and I don't see any good coming of that. And
it doesn't seem like a good
no, not at all. But it's really recent, but it is slightly troubling. So I feel that medically speaking, I need to make those breaks as much as anything else, because I don't want my eyesight becoming permanently fixed on something, 24 inches away from my face.
And I do think that is the idea behind the look at something 20 feet away thing. Yeah. So it might be helpful.
Yeah. Good point. Okay. Thank you.
But yeah, so all of these specific techniques aside, scaling us back, the idea of taking breaks, at least for Nathan and I, seems to be really important. I think everyone's different. I've explored the Pomodoro technique before, which is the 25 minutes working, 5-minute break. And I don't like it a lot for me. I feel like 25 minutes isn't enough time to really get into it. I find that what works for me best is somewhere around 50 or 60 minutes with a break. I rebel against it, but go ahead, Nathan.
No, I was just going to say I completely agree. 25 minutes to me. I've tried that technique, but it was a long, long time ago, and I became frustrated by how short 25 minutes was. And I didn't really realize that there was a similar technique over longer periods of time. I just thought that's the technique. I'm not going to use it. So for me, it's generally hours. I'm quite happy doing hours at a time.
Okay.
And I don't really notice a drop in the first hour. Probably in the second hour, it's starting to taper off a little bit. So I should probably enforce something a little bit like you, 50 minutes or an hour or something. That probably would create more productivity. I've just got a little aside, because I know there's quite a suite of tools out there that claim to be able to extend almost for free your attention span. So things like, for example, I don't know if you come across it, there's a web app called Brain FM.
Oh, it's on the list.
Oh, okay. So the idea of that is basically it plays you music, which is kind of benign. In a way, it's kind of not really there. It's just this sort of gentle thumping beat with some kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but it's there's no melody. You can't sort of get caught up in singing the lyrics.
Yeah.
And the intention of that is that it enables you to concentrate for a greater length of time. And I do wonder about that, because I don't really want to trick myself into working longer if the result of that is it's just nonsense, and I've just worked longer and the music's just been they've just pulled a veil over my head and realized when I pulled the veil back, actually you've just cheated yourself. You've worked for 2 hours and it felt like 2 hours, and you've convinced yourself that this music was in some way helping.
Yeah, I mean, so Brain FM, interestingly, as I understand it, the company that makes Brain FM is primarily a research company that's researching non-medicative treatments for ADHD. And so they created Brain FM as like a product that is backed by their research. So they're trying to like use audio to help with ADHD.
So there's science behind it, which they actually do go, to be fair, it's a long time since I looked, but they do make that clear. There's quite a lot of documentation on there. Some of it is almost impenetrably hard to read. But that's interesting.
I think you do speak to an important term. I think that more important than deep work is strategic deep work. Spending your deep work time on the right stuff. Because if you spend 4 hours uber concentrated on something dumb that doesn't move the needle, you can be as focused as you want, but if it's on the wrong thing, it's not going to move your business where you want.
Yeah.
And on this idea of breaks, so I love Brain FM. Part of it is that I was producing EDM before, and now I'm producing metal and those are like the two things I listen to. So now whenever I listen to music, it's really distracting because I'm a music producer now, and so I'm like, oh, I wonder how they made that sound. Let me open up Ableton and spend 6 hours on that. So for me, Brain FM is just a really helpful, non-distracting thing. But what I do find is that regardless of how hyper-focused I am, if I don't take breaks, it will feel like I'm getting more done in the short term, but I'm a lot more prone to going down rabbit holes where I spend too much time on the wrong stuff. And then the lack of breaks aggregates and costs me time.
Yeah.
And I can share an example from just today if you want.
Yeah, go.
Right? So I really struggle with writing short form content. If you couldn't have guessed that by the fact that we broke this podcast into 2 episodes. So I really want to get good at just writing a blog post that takes 5 minutes to read. And I set out to do that today. So I was like, all right, Zach, you've got 2 work cycles to write this post. And then it came to the end. I was like, oh, but I'm almost done. So let me just keep working on it. And then I bled beyond my 50-minute timer by like another 40 minutes. And doing that 2-hour break plus the 50-minute cycle before, I was fried. I didn't have any more capacity for really good work. My eyes were kind of more glazed over. Whereas if I hadn't done that and I'd heated my 50-10 blocks, I can usually these days do 5 deep work blocks on writing without getting too burnt. So everyone's different. You, dear listener, I think just ask yourself what works best for you. I think that there are some developers out there who maybe thrive on just like 5 hours, no bathrooms, no water. I don't know, just only coding.
An automaton, basically. Yeah,
but it's not me.
No. And you make a good point about water as well. I took that on board, a long time ago. And I really don't know that I could live without it. I always have a pint glass next to me, and it's basically full of water. And when it's empty, I just go and fill it up. I have a nice sink within like 10 meters of where I'm sitting, and I just go fill it up and come straight back down. The whole journey takes like 12 seconds. Nice. And I get through a lot of water, and I have no medical reason to believe it's powerful, but certainly seems to help.
Yeah, I mean, water's good. I'm right there with you. I have like a 1 liter bottle, and every time a 50-minute timer's up, I pee and fill it back up. So I probably drink like 5 or 6 liters a day.
I met somebody at WordCamp US recently who had a gigantic bottle. I'm going to say like 3 liters. It was truly huge. You almost couldn't get your hand around it. And the outside had times on it. So instead of measures, it had times of the day. And the further down the bottle you got, the later in the day it was. And the intention was to get to the mark by a certain time of the day. Now I'm not that serious about it. I just take a sip when I feel like I need it. It's really good for when I'm talking like this for an hour. It really helps sort of loosen the throat. But I thought that was curious. They'd actually gone to that extra level. It's a bit like the Pomodoro timer, only for water consumption. I thought that was interesting.
Keeping the on track. So it was like a big 1 gallon.
It was huge. Kind of thing. It was absolutely huge. I mean, I work in sort of pints, really. I'm sure it was like 4 or 5 pints. It was enormous. but I'd just never seen one of those before, and they were very, very, very persuasive. It was obviously something they believed in passionately, because I kind of almost mockingly said, "What are they for?" And they explained very carefully, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, got it. Makes sense."
Yeah, makes sense. Mm-hmm. My one of my friends he's in my Habitica party. He gives himself a little Habitica checkmark thing whenever he refills his water bottle, because he struggles to drink enough water. So he aims to click that little checkmark 4 times a day. Yeah. So there are lots of cool systems around this.
Yeah.
So yeah, within this category of deep work guidance, we talked about FocusMate, we talked about Pomodoro timers. Another thing that works really well if you don't want to talk to humans, which I often don't, there's this company called Ultraworking that I like. They put on like things like FocusMate, and they put on events and stuff, and they have this thing, it's like a Google Sheet template called Work Cycles. I'll make a note to include the link in the show notes. It basically it guides this 50-10 cycle or 25-5 or whatever you want. You can just kind of customize the Google Sheet. What I personally use is I use this app called TickTick, which we'll talk about more in the task management section. But TickTick is where I just kind of put all my personal life tasks, and it has a customizable Pomodoro timer thingy built in. Right. So you can just type in, I usually type 50-10. Lately, I've been experimenting with 60-10 because now that I'm not doing FocusMates, it doesn't have to end even on the hour, So, and then final one is an app which I'll talk probably again about, called Sunsama. I've been really loving that lately. I was resistant to it for a bit. My girlfriend turned me onto it, like most of these apps, and it allows you to show yourself your day at a glance and then zoom in and focus on one task. And if you're starting to fall behind on your day or your estimates, it'll encourage you to move on to the next one. It's primarily like a time blocking app, but it ties in your time blocks with your weekly goals and stuff like that. And I just really love it. So
I'm looking at the website for that one now, and it seems to have one of the things which every task management app that I've used never sort of seems to have, which is it kind of collates for you in a day the amount of time by the looks of things. So if you've got a certain amount of time logged for, let's say, 4 tasks and they all add up to 4 hours, then it presents you with that as 4 hours. And if you move one of those tasks onto the following day, it adjusts the amount of time you've got to dedicate to that day. That's interesting. That's interesting. I am so guilty of letting tasks overrun. And you know that thing that I'm sure you've been there before. You get to the end of the day and only half of the things are achieved. And so what do? You just push them all to the next day in the vain hope that that's going to work ultimately.
Yeah. And it has been a really, like, it's not cheap, this app, for what it does. I think it's like 20 or something bucks a month or 40. I don't know. But it's quickly become one of my very few shortlisted go-tos, because what I love about it is the simplicity. If you have too much on your schedule, it's like, are you sure you want to put 11 hours of work on your schedule today?
Yeah, it's helping you, yeah.
But what I love especially is that you can associate a given task with a weekly goal. So it gives you a way to kind of see how the time blocks that you're putting on your day tie into your weekly goals. Because what will often happen is I'll set a bunch of ambitious weekly goals and I'll get to the end and it turns out that I didn't make enough progress. Whereas with this, if I see that my weekly goals are, I don't know, write 2 blog posts, do 1 outreach, and work 5 hours on client work, then we're getting to Wednesday and I haven't touched client work yet, then I know I need to prioritize client work time blocks or whatever the layout is.
Yeah, it looks interesting. Sunsama. We'll stick all these in the show notes, yeah.
Yeah. And I think one other one like Sunsama, now I'm forgetting the name, Motion with an M, not Notion with an N. Motion like Mary.
Okay.
It does like what Sunsama does, but it has some AI thing where it like manages your time blocks for you. I don't like it as much, but I know some people do.
Okay.
So next up, routine management. So for me, part of that concept of building a protocol involves understanding what I need to do to be at my best. And especially for me, I'm extremely sensitive to getting thrown off by poor diet choices. And I'm ridiculously sensitive to getting thrown off by like not even a bad night's sleep, just a suboptimal night's sleep.
Huh, interesting. Okay.
And I think everyone knows what their or everyone has a sense probably of what their number one most important habit is that affects their life the most. If I were to just put you on the spot and say, Nathan, what do you think like your number one self-care habit is? What comes off your gut?
Yeah, I don't know if this is because of what you've just been talking about, but it is sleep.
How much do you need to sleep per night? To just 8?
8 is optimal, but I can function very, very well on significantly less for a finite amount of time.
I guess you do have kids. You
Yeah,
have the
you
skill.
I mean, you are the luckiest human alive if you don't have to adjust your sleeping regimen when you have children. Definitely, I can survive on less, but it's 8 is the real like the sweet spot.
And do you use something like an Aura and you're saying 8 hours of actual sleep, or it's like if you go to bed at 10, wake up at 6, that kind of 8?
It's more the be asleep for 8 hours. I've got to be honest with you. I would say I'm a 50% on the target there. I'd say half the time I don't actually manage that, but that's the amount of time where I wake up and I feel like if I've achieved that, I wake up and think, yeah, that was good. I'm
nice.
Almost like, you ping wide awake and you're ready to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and I'm with you. If I notice that sleep's at the top for me, even though diet's huge, because when I'm tired, I have lower willpower. When I have lower willpower, I eat things that mess me up even more.
And the thing about sleep is it's a cumulative thing, and it can't be redeemed in a matter of minutes, whereas for me, food can. I don't mean, if you're feeling hungry, you can sate the appetite by just putting food in your mouth. Obviously, you're probably talking more about a healthy, balanced diet over a longer period of time. But the sleep thing is just a cumulative drag, and you're really going to struggle to get yourself out of that hole if you've had weeks of poor sleep.
Yeah.
Almost everything. In fact, I was listening to a podcast episode of a completely different, nothing to do with WordPress, but it was a sleep expert. He's one of the few sleep experts, and it was about 4 hours long, all about sleep, and it was absolutely fascinating. Nice. I think he works at MIT, so he's got chops, and he was saying, without sleep, you are 24 hours, you're on the edge a little bit. 48 hours, you're in trouble. 72 hours without sleep, you are literally clinically insane.
Is this the dude who wrote Why We Sleep? That guy?
Possibly. I couldn't tell you. That he definitely had academic materials. I don't know if he was publishing a book at the time, but it was fascinating. The sleep deprivation, the things that it does to your brain over time, that if you claim to be able to sleep 4 hours a day and carry on, there's all sorts of problems that you are storing up for later on in your life that you can't possibly foresee now.
Yeah, and apparently even 1 hour of sleep deprivation per day massively ups your risk of cancer and autoimmune disease or something like that. By Matthew Walker, he's the Why We Sleep guy.
I can't remember. I'll look it up when you talk about something else. I'll have a quick look. Yeah.
But yeah, so for you, listener, what's your number one self-care habit? Is it sleep? Is it diet? Is it exercise? Is it journaling, meditation? What is it? I've noticed I keep a log of different experiments that I'm running on my body and brain, and I don't think I'll ever find anything as effective as just going to bed at 10:30, waking up at 7:30. If I can do that, I'm just golden.
Yeah.
So within this category of routine management, the idea is creating routines so that you can support yourself making your best choices without requiring a lot of willpower and without having to think about it. So this has just two. Habitica, once again, Habitica's in all these freaking categories. But something else that's been really cool, once again, learned from my girlfriend, is there's this app. I have iPhone now, so I don't know if it's on Android, but it's called Multi-Timer. It's not at all meant for this, but you can use it for this. It's basically just a timer app, and they have these interval timers where you can create a bunch of interval steps for each of the items in your routine. So I have one timer in there that's my pre-cat feeding morning routine, and then another one for after I fed my cat and I'm starting work, and then one for my evening. And so instead of me having to remember to brush my teeth and floss and lock the door and unplug the air filter and just all those other things, I just start my little interval timer and it tells me what to do. I click the step, click the step, click the step. And that pairs really well with Habitica, because there are certain things like flossing that I always lie to my dentist and say that I do, when truly, I don't do it and I want to. Habitica pairs really well because I created a daily in Habitica that I categorized as, quote, hard, so that it gives me more experience, more gold, more mana when I complete it. And so now I have this nice little dopamine incentive to actually do this thing that isn't particularly rewarding on its own.
Yeah, I noticed when you put the show notes together, you listed out a whole bunch of things which typically most people don't add into the show notes, and that there were all sorts of things that you wanted to ask me and things that you wanted to check at the end of the podcast and things like that. And I did notice a tendency for you to be very thorough in putting all these things down. And obviously, you've just given it some thought and in they go, and then it's part of what you want to do on that day. It's kind of, you've outsourced it to, well, in this case it was Notion, but it could be anything else. But you want to sort of just take that, make it so that you don't have to think too much about it, but give yourself a nice hit when you achieve it as well. It's good.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things, a lot of the time our weaknesses can be alchemized into strengths. And for me, I have always struggled with a terrible, terrible, terrible memory. But I've found a way to cope, which is just put stuff in place so that I don't have to remember.
Yes.
And my girlfriend still gets really annoyed at me all the time for forgetting everything. But at least I can not disappoint my clients and not drop the ball with my life and work by creating these structures.
Yeah, this is genuinely a problem that I face. My memory is also atrocious. I mean, prodigiously bad. In fact, I'm going to say, Zach, I'm more or less certain that your memory is superior to mine. Mine is just appalling. And for the same reason, I've got all these apps everywhere. I honestly don't know what I would do without technology. I would just be going around with like a Bible-thick pad of paper, constantly searching for things that I'd written down if it wasn't for apps. So yeah, I get it.
Here's the test, Nathan. So
Don't ask me birthdays.
I often will go to email myself little ideas. Like I'm like, ooh, this is a cool app idea. I should code this up.
Yeah.
And then I'll find that I actually already emailed myself that idea like 6 months ago.
No,
And then
I don't have that problem. No, because I don't fulfill those sorts of tasks. But it's just the mundane stuff like what I'm supposed to be doing tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the calendar tells me. So there is a bit of me which wonders whether or not I have divested that, and so I've forgotten to care because the calendar takes care of it. In the same way that, you know, that there a slight concern maybe for some people listening will be, well, if everything's in an app, or I've offset everything to an app, maybe there's a bit of me which will give up on making a mental note of it. And I think there's probably a bit of truth in that. If I make more of an effort with the calendar, I would probably have more recollection of what was in it. My wife, as an example, who never writes anything in a calendar, remembers everything. It's absurd. You know, she knows when everybody's birthday is throughout the year. She knows what's coming up in 6 months' time. She knows the date of a concert that we've got to attend months from now and what time it starts and all of that. And I'm like, hang on, I've got to search concert in Google Calendar.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make you worse. Like literally just now while you were talking about that, my coping mechanism is I wrote a little note in Notion, talk about memory making us, like talk about apps making our memory worse. I had to write that down to remember this 30 seconds later, but I think from everything I've heard, it's true. But you have to ask yourself, what is better? What is it better to feel like you, quote, should be better, feel like you should be someone else, and try your best to remember everything and inevitably fail because your brain's not just not wired that way, or accept that we are all cyborgs because it's 2022 and our phones are tethered to us, and literally all of us have offloaded some of our processing power and consciousness into these devices.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just okay.
No, I have a very good anecdote. I used to play in a band with a guy, and he during the day he worked in IT and he was quite senior, and he showed up one day with this thing. So this is going to age me. He showed up with a Palm Pilot. Do you remember those? So Palm Pilot was like a really kind of almost like a prehistoric piece of technology, but it could sync to your Windows machine. So he synced his calendars and he synced his contacts, and he whipped it out in this band practice, and we all just like pounced on him, you know, mocked him horribly about this thing. And he said to us all, yeah, but if I lose this, then I'll just get it back tomorrow because it's all on my computer at home. And we just mocked him horribly. Anyway, it turned out the next week the drummer showed up and said, yeah, I lost my contact book this week. I've lost them all. He had it written on a little paper book. So I think there is merit, and I am happy to have a calendar as a sort of surrogate memory. It's fine.
Yeah, and I think that this little convo we're having now kind of in jest really does speak to the broad thing I want to cover today, which is like, I struggle with this a lot personally, emotionally. Like I feel like I should remember better. I feel like a bad boyfriend, bad son. But the thing that's difficult is like, you know, if you miss an event, there is something you could have done. You could have written it on a calendar. But with like remembering something, you can't remember everything. You can't make a note about everything. Like, you know, some stuff slips, and you have to kind of just accept that this is who you are.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to shame yourself and force yourself into being somebody else, instead be strategic about what you can put in place to support you. And that's like kind of the theme of all this stuff today. We're about to talk about impulse control. And for me with ADHD, like ADHD people just always seek dopamine hits. And so if I sit here and I say, Zach, you should floss. You're supposed to floss. The dentist said you should floss. Why can't you just freaking floss? That doesn't get me to floss. But if I say, ooh, golden experience points, that gets me to floss. You know, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's great.
And so I think that's the key, is just own where you're at. Don't feel shameful about it. Look at it detached emotionally and just say, this is a problem. What's a potential solution I can put into place that doesn't require me to, quote, be better?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay,
That's
with
obviously
that's
quite
probably
deep.
a good segue.
Yeah. So next category is task management, and then we'll talk about impulse control. So task management, simple. We don't need to dive too deep, but just basically, like, if you've heard of the getting things done framework, I haven't fully educated myself on it, but one thing I do know about it that I like is get things out of your head, have a place to put things, and make notes about where you left off last time you worked on something. Those are my two things I know about getting things done. And so
Isn't there also a bit in there about getting the small things done quickly?
Yeah, he says if it takes under 2 minutes,
Do it
don't
now.
make a task, just do it now. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think there's
this
a lot
is
more
the
to
problem
it.
with email, I think, is that almost all email can be answered in 2 minutes. So you end up, kind of getting sucked into it. But yeah, get things done quickly. Just before we move on from that one, I know that most people have got an app. My problem here, which is very much a first world problem, and forgive me, but is that I can't settle on an app that or a system, I should say, which is my perfect method. I've got probably at least 4 ongoing at the minute. So I've got one app for one kind of task, one app for another kind of task, one app for a family. You know, it's just a mess. And that is literally that I haven't found the perfect one. I'm always thinking, when I find the perfect one, I'll consolidate it all and it'll all go in there. But I've yet to find it.
Well, so is there some problem with having the 4 different ones beyond not wanting to pay for 4 subscriptions? Like,
The only there is that. The only problem is remembering which one the thing is in, because there's slight overlap.
Okay.
And sometimes as I'm transitioning from one to the other, I fail to complete it because, you know, kids arrive home or something, and I'm halfway through migrating the task from one to the other or something like that. So half of them live over here, half of them live over there, and I never quite complete that job. So I'm always shuffling between 2. Yeah, it's a bit ridiculous. Actually, you would be fairly shocked if you looked at the system I've got for tracking tasks.
I do use multiple things, but I feel like they have discrete boundaries, and I feel mine works. So maybe you'll get some ideas when I talk about mine.
Yeah, okay.
And I want us to go fast because ultimately we're getting long in this episode anyway, and we're probably going to talk about tools at this point. So let's still try to get through the system, and I won't go too deep on mine. But for my task management, what I really like is TickTick for small, dumb, little random tasks like, oh, remember to buy toilet paper tonight. That goes in TickTick. Or remember to respond to my family later. That goes in TickTick. And this one is going to come up on the distraction ones. But one of the things I found really valuable for deep work, as I mentioned, I have a terrible memory. And so I have these habits where if I see a notification, I feel compelled to answer it immediately because I know that if I don't, it'll never get responded to.
Right.
Or if I have an idea, I feel like I have to do something with it because otherwise it'll go away forever. That's where TickTick is so good. Like if I'm in a deep work block and I accidentally see some notification on my phone that I didn't mean to, I'll swipe it away on my phone so it doesn't distract me anymore. And I'll make a TickTick task to go to respond to that person or do that thing. So it's like a controlled notification. Or if I get an idea for a new blog post or some task I need to do for a client, all of that, I just immediately put away, get it out of my mind, put it in TickTick. Don't have to remember it because I get a lot of anxiety and brain looping if I have to try to remember something because I know I can't. The only strategy I ever actually remember is like I attach something weird to my body so that I look at it and I'm like, why the hell is this on my body?
Yeah, why have I tied the knot in this?
Yeah. So for task management, TickTick's for all that small stuff. Notion is for projects.
Okay, because it's more feature rich. It's not just tasks. You can bind all sorts of things into one Notion page, can't you? Yeah.
Exactly. It's hierarchical. That's the thing. So like within my Notion, I break it down: personal projects, my startups and businesses, client projects. So
okay, that's a nice, easy separation, yeah.
Yeah. Kick-ass freelancing is in here, and my startups and projects for this episode. Client projects, like any website I build. Personal projects would be like music production, singing, journaling, whatever. And then Sunsama is kind of like a high-level, focused-in daily thing. So when I'm working during my day, I'll look at Sunsama, and I might create a Sunsama tasks for like work on XYZ client. And then I could go into Notion to see exactly where I left off with that client and what the tasks are I have to work on.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So that's how I break it down.
Okay.
Do you have anything you want to add for Task Manager?
Just to let you know the sort of suites that I use. I've got this active inbox for email, which acts as a sort of to-do list in a way. You can assign tasks directly and bind them to email, which is kind of nice. And they pop back up, so you can say, sleep this email for a week and then pester me about it in a week, that kind of thing, which is quite nice. I also use Evernote quite a lot, which until recently I was kind of thinking of getting rid of, and they've done quite a lot of dev work. And I think basically they've looked at things like Notion and realized they need to have the note doesn't need to be a note. The note needs to be a sort of a point consolidating more other data types. So they've added in tasks and all these other things inside of Notes. And so I'm staying the course there, seeing if it ends up morphing into something like Notion.
Okay.
And then I also use Todoist as well.
Nice.
Which it looks a little bit like TickTick. The one thing I've noticed immediately about TickTick, which is really nice, is that they've got the really nice affordable annual plan. So if you've listened to Zach and you're enjoying this, it's only $28 for a whole year, which is pretty decent in my book. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to use both Todoist and Evernote, and I just Evernote was too long ago. It didn't really work for me. Todoist, I definitely like TickTick better.
Yeah.
OneNote, you seem to think Sunsama was cool. You can actually, I don't personally do it, but you can make tasks out of emails in Sunsama as well.
Okay.
It hooks in with Gmail.
Yeah, you're able to do the same thing with Todoist as well. They had like that extension which lives in the sidebar of Gmail, but Active Inbox is much more. You can do all sorts with Active Inbox. It's much cleverer. You can sort of tag things and put dates on things, and and you can see with clicks of buttons every email that belonged to a certain thread and all of this. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Nice.
Yep. Okay, there we go. We've done with that.
So next up, we've got impulse control, which, as you can guess from what I've said, I'm quite excited about. We talked a bit about a lot of these in the last episode, so we don't need to get too nerdy. But the main goal for the impulse control one is to just try to reduce willpower. So in Nathan's example earlier, he would look to that Gmail tab on the left and it wasn't there. But imagine if he kept it there. Imagine all the willpower that would be required to not click that tab every day. It would just be unnecessary struggle. And so when you're looking for tools to help with impulsivity, the goal isn't for you to be, quote, better or, quote, stronger. It's for you to eliminate the things that will require you to have willpower in the first place. So a couple within this, so we talked about the last episode. One of them is Freedom. It's an app, and it allows you to block certain websites on schedules.
Nice.
Inbox and Ready is what I use, and Nathan uses something else. What's the one you use, Nathan? For blocking
well,
Inbox?
I've just got a system whereby I use Firefox's. I use in order to block things. You mean?
In order to make it so that if you go to Gmail, it hides all your emails.
Oh yeah, so that is also a feature of Active Inbox.
Okay,
Sorry,
gotcha.
Yeah, there's it's called Focus Mode. And you click a little icon in the UI and it just gets rid of all of the things. And,
nice.
Yeah, it's good.
And something I was looking into the other day, I think the challenge with deep work, if you do reactive work as part of your job, like let's say your whole job is to fix servers when they go down, you can't not check your email. And I get that. I get that not everybody can just zone out of notifications. I think it's about you seeking out the notifications versus letting them seek you out. And so there are other things that you can do that would be helpful here. Like I learned that there's a setting in Gmail that you can toggle to hide message previews. So message previews will hijack your attention, but subject lines alone will just tell you what the email's about. So if you were to disable previews, you could go into your inbox, see what all the subjects are, make sure there's nothing that's like a fire that needs to be put out, close your inbox, get back to what you were doing. You could build a cycle where you check your inbox for fires to put out every hour, and you still do those 50-minute work cycles. So if you do reactive work, it's not that deep work's not for you. You're just going to have to be creative. So that's one tool. And then the last tool within this impulse control is eliminating inputs and distractions. So if you check the news first thing, that's the kind of thing that can hijack your attention, mess up your creativity, stuff like that. If you check Slack, email, phone, Facebook, Instagram, anything where you're exposed to somebody else's opinion or a potential problem is, in my opinion, a risk.
Yeah. like I said in the last episode, and I've said countless times on this podcast, I've taken the hammer to the knot, definitely, and just uninstalled everything. They literally are not on my phone anymore, so they simply can't interact with me. So, not for everybody that, though.
And I heard one objection recently to this, which is that a designer said that it's extremely high risk to wake up, not check any notifications, and to start design, because what if the scope changed overnight?
Yeah.
So if you have the kind of work where that would happen, in my opinion, scope changing overnight like that can be sorted out with a better client interview process. But if you literally, there's nothing you can do and your scope might change at the last minute, then I would challenge you to still lay out your tasks in advance. And maybe your first deep work block of the day is 30 minutes. 30 minutes notification free, and then you check your inbox. And when you do check your inbox, you don't read the news, you don't check Facebook, you don't do all that stuff. You just check your inbox, you just check Slack, and you try to only look at subject lines. Just, you just kind of have to curate. That's the idea here.
Yeah.
So we can move on to the next section if you like.
Yeah. Okay.
So next category is connection with the most important work. This kind of ties into the idea of strategic deep work. And within this category, it's kind of less probably about tools and more about habits or lifestyle things or whatever. But something I find really useful is doing goal setting yearly, monthly, and weekly, as well as like daily connections in Sunsama and my daily journal. And the reason why is that a big yearly goal can be reverse engineered into monthly, weekly, and daily goals. And usually when I set my big goals, I try to have them be driven by something I can control rather than something that's dependent on an end result. So for example, if I said I want to earn $100,000 this year as a freelancer, that's not necessarily directly in my control, but I could spend 100 hours on outreach to agencies to seek partnerships. That's something that I can definitely control. I can control the time I spend doing that, even if I can't control the results. So having goals like that and engineering them into what has to happen at smaller intervals, I find really helpful.
Yeah. That's really interesting as well. You got so many insights. It's quite something, Zach.
Perhaps overwhelming, I fear. But I think, my goal here isn't for you to just take on 50 million things. It's just to find one that resonates, implement it. If it works or doesn't work, choose another one, implement that. And then before you know it, you've got about 1 million things that you can't seem to fit into 2 podcast episodes. So.
Yeah. But also, I guess some people will have some of this stuff under control, and it may be that they don't have other aspects. And
totally.
Not everybody's floundering in every sphere. So it's possible that you just need, to take control of, like me, the inbox in the morning, but some of the other things take care of themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And everyone knows without having to really think about it, what their low hanging fruit, easy win is that gets them a free hour per day. Maybe that's not checking the news first thing. Maybe it's not checking Facebook first thing. Like there are these sorts of things that just, we all know if we didn't do this, we'd have no worse of a life and we just have more time to do things we actually enjoy. Yeah. And I feel like if you do nothing but that one little thing, all this other stuff, it doesn't matter. It's just like icing on the cake to get another little bit.
Yeah. Hot tip. You don't get an hour extra by going to bed later or getting up earlier. Stick to the 8-hour bedtime regime.
Yeah.
How are we doing? Have we managed to get through all of that? I know there was a lot there, but
we have a little bit left.
Keep going.
All right. So on this connection with important work, once you've got your goals, I think it's just a matter of keeping yourself on task with them. And that's where, as I mentioned, I love Sansama, because before what would happen is I'd set my weekly goals and then I'd go out to do my daily task and there'd be no connection between my day's work and my week's goals. Whereas Sansama, the week's goals are kind of like always floating in front of me when I plan a day. So that's cool. Last category, and we can end this thing, is deep focus encouragement. And this is where like Brain FM and stuff comes in. So these are tools that will just help you to be focused and stay focused. So one of those is naturally Sansama. When you're in Sansama, you can like press spacebar when you're on a task and it'll pull it up into focus mode. So you can't see any other task for the day. You can't see your week. You can't see anything. It's just sitting in front of you. Hey, Zach, you're supposed to be working on this. So that's really cool. Work cycle sheets are really great for this too, because you type in advance what you want to work on this session. So if you ever kind of fall off, you just look at that, you're referenced. Brain FM is really helpful because they have their magical sciencey wizardry that helps you focus. Paper notes. Paper is a thing that exists. So if you have something you really want to do today and you want all your work to be in service to this one big ass goal, just write it on a piece of paper.
Yeah, I am big on paper for the day ahead.
Yeah.
I can consolidate a lot of the things by just flicking through the disparate task managers. I just write down the most important ones. And funnily enough, as we've been talking throughout this whole episode, I've just been scribbling notes. It's just part of what works for me. I think there's something about the fact that you've engaged muscles in a certain way that seems to commit it more into my head and seems to give it more importance or credence. I don't quite know what I'm saying there, but it definitely has some impact, which is not quantifiable for me.
And science actually backs it.
Oh, okay.
Apparently, if you write something on a piece of paper with a pencil or a pen or whatever, it engages a different part of your brain than if you were to write the note on a computer with a keyboard.
I found that when I was at university studying, if I read something 15 times, there was a 1 in 5 chance that I would remember it. And if I wrote it twice, then there was a 100% chance that it was going to be remembered. So it was
awesome.
Yeah, it really worked. Yeah.
So another one, deep focus encouragement, we already covered it, is no inputs, muted notifications. Don't let anyone contact you. And
as if.
You can't
hysterical.
edit that out. You
That's
have to keep
so
that. You have
funny.
to keep it.
That's
I'll let you go turn it
brilliant.
off.
No. I'm going to
Okay.
keep that in and let it just ring off.
Okay.
That's just brilliant.
Yeah,
Could not imagine that being better timed. It'll be just some robocall. It always is. Please carry on. I think that's brilliant. A serendipity.
Yeah. Another one is strategic breaks, as covered. So cue your breaks with Pomodoro timers, breaks in FocusMate, multi-timer, or even just, like a stopwatch on your phone. Something to remind you to stop working, take a couple minutes, look at something far away, maybe do some exercise, take a walk, whatever. That getting things done technique of marking where you're leaving off so that when you come to pick it back up, you have a note for yourself of what you were trying to do. That has been huge for me. Often when I'm working on a big software product or something, I will be like, what the hell was I even doing? And then I have to comb through all this old code. Whereas if you just make notes, much easier. Another one, which Nathan has a good story on that he might skip for time, is physically creating some sort of visual distinction, especially if you live with roommates, significant others, or children, to help them know that you're in work mode. So this might be physically closing your office door, or if you don't have an office, my girlfriend once made a little curtain that she would slide closed. My mom has an open for business sign like that you'd see on a coffee shop, just on her office door that she'll flip. Nathan, do you want to share your story?
Yeah, mine's interesting because it's a personal one. And when I was growing up, my father used to work at home. He had an office at home long before lockdowns and all of that. And he would typically get dressed into his suit. So the suit was largely the thing, but quite a lot of times he wouldn't because he knew he wasn't going to be seeing clients face to face. But the indicator to us, which was please leave me alone, was a pair of shoes. He had a particular pair of shoes, and when those shoes were on his feet, we knew that don't trouble father because he's in work mode. And then he would flip them off and he would be back into sort of father mode, and he was engaged and engaging. He could chat with us. So that was a really good one, and it worked because we all knew the rules. Yeah.
And an idea that gave me that I think is maybe on the ridiculous side would be if I want to do that, I would get a custom shirt made that literally says, "I am in work mode. Do not talk to me."
Yeah, I think you should get that made on a cape, like a
Somebody tells me my cat would
Batman
not
cape.
respect it though.
Don't mess with me. I'm working cape.
Yeah. So the last one in this category is batching your calls.
Yep.
So yeah, go ahead. Let's hear it.
I'm just in complete agreement. I love this one. Yeah.
So for me, if I take a client call or a sales call or anything in the middle of the day, it just kind of screws up the whole day. It screws up the stuff before, it screws up the stuff after it. And so what I found is really good is shoving them towards the end of the day. For me personally, maybe different for you, and batching them. Having the hard start and end time will be helpful for everybody, and you can kind of condense your whole thing. If you use a tool like Calendly, you can tweak your availability so that it doesn't even show up as available in Calendly until 4 p.m. or whatever.
That's exactly what I did. I had we need a call kind of calendar. It wasn't Calendly, it was another one, but the principle was the same. And I would just allocate a period of time, and the slots would be 10 minutes, and there'd be like 3 at the end of the day. And it was good. It worked really, really effectively. Yeah. Actually, also, strangely, just the impediment of, and I never really intended it this way, but I have a feeling that that hoop to jump through sometimes made people second guess whether the phone call was even necessary. Because they obviously had to go through a web page to book something and consider the time implications for them, and very often, they would phone up and I'd say, go onto the calendar and book it in, and we'll have a proper chat, and then it would never materialize. So obviously something wasn't quite as necessary as it purported to be.
Yeah, I feel like most calls end up actually not being necessary a lot of the time.
Yeah.
One note on this that my girlfriend has found really helpful and freed up a bunch of free time in her work schedule is she themes her days. So she'll have one day, she's a copywriter, she'll have one day that's like her strategy and drafting day. She does that all day. Another day that's like a meeting day. Another day that's for blah, 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 blah. So for me, I'm not quite so keen, but I might play with it a little bit more. But themed days might be something that works for you as a listener. And I
can totally subscribe to that. I do that. I mean, the constraints on my theming is they're not massively dissimilar. They're broadly the same, but I do things like that. I have a day of a thing and another day of a thing, and it keeps the interest going for me. Yeah.
Nice. So I reckon, we could go for another 4 hours on this if we want, but this seems like a pretty good place to.
I think we've done pretty well. I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you for Zach. Zach's been incredibly generous with his time, but also the amount of preparation that Zach's put into it. You probably won't ever get to see it, but there is quite a lot of thought that Zach's put into this, and like you said, we probably could have spun it out into a course or something, which probably segues into something that you may want to mention. But so from my point of view, thank you for the amount of time that you've put into it. It's a large subject, and you've obviously given it a lot of thought over the time.
Thank you. It's been so fun to chat with you. I think I've laughed more on these calls than like in the past few days. So
well, I'm really pleased about that. So if people want to contact you, there's a little spark has been kindling a fire, and you want to reach out to Zach and get more information and plunder his thoughts and probably fill out his Calendly form, where would we go, Zach? And also feel free to mention any products, services, or anything that you are promoting at the moment.
Well, so I actually made a free course for all this. So obviously today I shared a bunch of information, and if I were listening, I think I would be a little bit overwhelmed because it's just too much, and there's not really a framework. We didn't even go through this kind of truncated framework. So if you've listened to this and you think it would be cool to implement strategic deep work into your business, if you feel like that's something you'd benefit from, you'll dig this free course that I made, which you can sign up for at kickassfreelancing.com/deepwork. Just one word, kickassfreelancing.com/deepwork. And basically it's going to walk you through all the stuff I shared today and on the last episode, and a bit more that I had to cut even beyond this, in a linear start to finish way. So I'll kind of help you get some easy wins early on, quick wins, and then I'll help you refine and get better and stuff like that, and hopefully help you build a protocol that works really well for you. That's my goal. So if you wanted to join that, it's free, and I think you'd dig it.
Do you want to share us? Do you do social? I know that it's probably the antithesis of what we've been saying, but if you've got a social handle or anything,
sure. My Twitter, I'll have to remember. Here we go. My Twitter is Zach Makes Things, and that's ZACH makes plural, things plural. I tried to make it to be podcast friendly, but as I read it, it doesn't actually sound that podcast friendly.
The things can easily get lost, the pluralization. Yeah, that's fine. Well, honestly, Zach, I really appreciate it. It's been great fun having a chat with you over the last couple of days. Really interesting, informative. It's been a nice to and fro, me sharing what I think and you sharing what you think. It's been lovely. So thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you once again.
Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Lovely to have Zach on the show. Really interesting to talk to somebody about something, well, not particularly in the WordPress space, but if you are sitting down at a computer and you're finding yourself distracted, I'm sure that the last 2 episodes will have been very useful to you. Obviously, Zach mentioned in the podcast the course that he's offering. Go to the wpbuilds.com website, search for episode number 312, and you can find the links there to his kickassfreelancing.com deep work course. It's a step-by-step implementation of all of the bits and pieces that he's been talking about. Go and check that out. And also, if you feel like leaving us a comment, please do. Search for episode number 312 and leave us a comment there. The WP Builds podcast was brought to you today by GoDaddy Pro. GoDaddy Pro, the home of managed WordPress hosting that includes free domain, SSL, and 24/7 support. Bundle that with the Hob by GoDaddy Pro to unlock more free benefits to manage multiple sites in one place. Invoice clients and get 30% off new purchases. You can find out more by going to go.me/WP Builds. And once again, I'd like to extend my thanks to GoDaddy Pro for their ongoing support of the WP Builds podcast. We will be back on Monday for the This Week in WordPress show. Please feel free to join us. I know it's very early for people in the US. It's 2 p.m. UK time, which is often, in many cases, very, very early in the morning, perhaps too early for the US audience. But we're there live and we enjoy all of the comments that come our way. You can collect what we produce as a audio episode the following morning if you go to wpbuilds.com/subscribe and subscribe over there. Or, of course, do that on your favourite podcast player and consume the audio each time we produce an episode. One last quick mention, wpbuilds.com/sponsors. If you're into sponsoring the Page Builder Summit, we'd love to have you on board. But that's it. That's all I've got to say this week. I hope that you enjoyed it. Stay safe. Some cheesy music fading in. Bye-bye for now.